minds, we're so smart. And we think that those rabbis are so stupid. What do they know? They're so backwards. They don't understand science. And it's true about some people, but I think it's a little bit of a stigma. The greatest poskim, in order to say what the halacha is about any new phenomenon, first thing they have to do, and they do, is they learn. They learn physics and chemistry and electricity and circuitry, and to understand exactly what's going on in terms of how things work. And the truth is, it's a challenge when there's a new technology. Very few people understand it. But that's the job of the posek, the halach of the saiser. You can't give a psak unless you know the reality, unless you know how it works. And intuitively, a lot of people think that there's some history to this, that we know that there's a prohibition of lighting a fire on Shabbat. And when you flip a light switch, it's like you're turning on a fire. But when you get into the nitty-gritty, it's not so simple. Where's the fire? And I don't want anybody to think that the rabbis are so stupid that they just are so amazed by the technology that they say, this must be fire, and fire is prohibited, so it's prohibited. No. Maybe there are some first reactions that are like that, but ultimately, we all know that you have to understand what exactly happens when you complete an electrical circuit with different types of machinery, different types of functions. And, it takes a while till people actually understand the technology. And then there's a lot of misunderstanding. And yet, we know that how we decide whether something is prohibited or permitted on Shabbat is based on the 39 categories of work. 39 categories are quite widespread. And, if it's not boneh, maybe it's makeh b'patish. Thank you. And if it's not, kotev, maybe it's memachek. Maybe you're smoothing out. There's all sorts of 39 different activities which we, as they're defined in the Talmud, we have to check that we're not going to violate any of them, let alone the rabbinic prohibitions, which we talked about, like muktzah, everybody knows, and we spoke about something called molid, right? When you create something new, it has some permanency. So there's a lot of considerations to think about when you try to analyze any phenomenon, any activity. Is it prohibited? The bottom line should start with, of course it's permitted. All the activities are permitted. It's only going to be forbidden if it fits into one of those 39 categories of work, if it gets defined as such. So what do you say, guys? Does electricity, does it fit into any of the 39 categories of work? So we already spoke about it a few times. We said, well, if there's a heating element that heats up and glows hot red, so you're actually maybe creating a fire. But there's many electric circuits which don't cause anything to heat up. There's no filament. An incandescent light bulb has a filament which heats up and starts to glow. That's like creating a fire. But when you just turn on a fan, there's no heating element. What are you doing? There's electrons inside the wires, and they're going around. I don't know if you studied electricity in high school. We did some school projects. You take a battery and you put it together, and you connect the circuit. Okay, well, what could be the problem with that? It's not fire. You're not cooking. You're not smoothing. What could be the problem? So, if you remember back 2 days ago, the first chapter we did in this week, in chapter 15, was about boneh and soter. There was one great rabbi who said, But when you complete the circuit, you're building something new. It's like you're building a building. You can't see it. It's just electrons, but it doesn't flow through. And then when it doesn't do anything until you complete the circuit. If you complete the circuit, then the machine works. So it's like you're building the machine every time you use electricity. This is one idea, one approach. Other rabbis, famously the Chazon Ish, decided that electricity would be an Isser Torah because of boneh. Okay, another rabbi disagreed with him. A young rabbi at the time. He wrote a whole book against this bigger rabbi, the Chazon Ish, who was well known, posik of Bnei Brak. This young rabbi from Jerusalem said, I don't think that's right. I don't think you're creating anything new. The circuit's all there. You're just like opening up a tap for the electrons to go through or to close. You're not building anything when you open up a tap of water and let the water flow through. So why would that be any different? He said it's not. I don't think it's boneh, and it's not prohibited from the Torah. Another rabbi, current big posek, he says they're both right, but the problem is not boneh. The problem is makeh patish. Makeh patish is the final hammer blow, which completes. It makes the item usable. It's what makes it finished off. And he said, so it's true, you're not really building the circuit. The circuit exists. It's just a question of whether the electrons can flow or not. But when you make the electrons flow, that makes it into a usable vessel. Then it's a usable instrument. If you, for example, the fan gets the electrons going, and then that's the final hammer blow, which makes it usable. So he says it's still prohibited from the Torah. So there's a debate back and forth. Makeh patish. Anyways, and then. Believe it or not, there is this opinion, which a lot of people don't know about. But Rav Melamed brings it here from Rav Kook. And Rav Kook goes back to the original thought that actually maybe it's fire. Fire? What kind of fire is there? Let's see. We'll read it inside. We'll see the debate about it. The bottom line is that all of the poskim agreed. Whether it's the Oraita or the Rabbanan, even Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the young rabbi who disagreed with the Chazon Ish, he said it's probably Asur Midrabbanan because it's Molid, or it's something that you're definitely creating something new when you complete the circuit, even though it's not building a new vessel. It's or he says maybe it's not in the spirit of Shabbat. Rabbinically prohibited, everybody agrees that you should not use electricity on Shabbat. That's the bottom line. There's some people, but it makes a big difference. Whether when you have extenuating circumstances, how flexible can you be in allowing the use of electricity? This comes to major issue. For example, we have now cars that are electric cars. So the regular combustion engine, well, there's a fire in there. We know that there's a fire. You push down on the gas, and there's an explosion, and it pushes the pistons, and there's actual real fire inside the engine. Let alone the spark plugs. But an electric vehicle, well, it's only electricity. There's no fire. Maybe it's only permitted midrabanan. If it's only prohibited midrabanan, then maybe if you need to get to shul, you'd be allowed. I don't know. If you do it b'shinui, drive the car with your legs. I don't know. But you can get all sorts of interesting considerations. Ask a non-Jew to drive. Better take the electric car instead of the combustion engine. There's a lot of ramifications to how we define what is the prohibition of electricity. And the many electric appliances are part of our lives now. So chapter 17 is a very important chapter. I think it's lovely. One of the reasons we use this book, not that we agree with every single word every psak that Rav Melamed gives, but that other halacha books that people have used for centuries, giving over the laws of Shabbat, They don't talk about electricity because there was no electricity, right? Famously, the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. It'll tell you in great detail whether you're allowed to feed your animal and that how to make a business deal with non-Jews and how to avoid the problem of kilayim and the type of linens that they used in Hungary 150 years ago. But they didn't have running water. They didn't have electricity. So we have a lot of new conditions in the modern world, and we need to use a modern book to see what the rabbis have to say throughout the 150 years. Rabbis have been writing halachic tshuvot. Tshuvot, what's a tshuva? Answer to a question. What is, when I say tshuvot, usually sheilot or tshuvot. It goes together. What's that called? There's a technical word we use for it. It's called responsa. The responsa literature. So, there's a new invention. So you send a letter to the rabbi. Is this allowed? Is it not? The rabbi has to do his homework. He has to figure out, look, understand the technology, understand the reality, and then look into the books and see, okay, maybe we can get some new insights from the Talmud. Does this fit into this category? Well, we have to understand that category better to understand if it fits and in what circumstances. So there's a lot that's been written over the last 150 years. Eventually, all those decisions in those answers, they make their way into codes, into a book of halachot, like this one. Chapter 17 never existed before. There's one other halacha book about the laws of Shabbat, which is a modern book, which he quotes often. SSK. You should know it from the footnotes here, from the quotations. SSK is Shmirat Shabbat K'ilchata. Shmirat Shabbat K'ilchata was written about 50 years ago by Rabbi Neubert, a student of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, where, of course, it's a modern book, so of course he dealt with all the questions about the electric boiler and using the hot water on Shabbat and all those. And we're going to see there's other ramifications with the type of medicine that we do today and whether that's permitted or forbidden on Shabbat. So you have to have a book which relates to the modern condition. So Baruch Hashem, we have a few like this. There's lots and lots of modern halacha books. So this one is particularly well written, and as we said many times, we like that he throws in some of the meaning behind the mitzvot. It's not just dry laws, do this, don't do that. And he's very talented at putting it together in a nice package and presenting it in an understandable way, even for beginners like us. So here we are reading this book, but really it's a pleasure to have this in a halacha book. Chapter 17. You ready to start? Ready to start after that introduction? Chapter 37. Okay, Yisrael, you want to start reading for us for today?
37.
Yeah.
The term of electricity lighting and
Appliances, yeah.
Prohibited by Torah law to the term on and electricity light or activity and the industrial heating element. Because when the hot is turned on or a heating element
Incandesces.
and the fireman incandescence.
Right.
And see about 4.5 and 3 regularly.
Fluorescent bulbs. Yeah.
Cautious us, and this is a form of the Torah prohibited by the Torah.
Okay, good. Stop there. Thank you. So this is the first starting point, is that if you do have havara, what's havara? We learned it yesterday, right? Havara, kindling a light, lighting a fire. So for sure that's going to be prohibited by Torah law. Now, the incandescent light bulb has a filament in there, a tiny little piece of metal that heats up. It gives off light and warmth and heat. And that's considered fire, and you're not allowed to turn that on. Also, an electric heating element. We spoke about that when in your stove or um, in your hot water heater. There's an element at the bottom that heats up. Heating up metal is also considered to be fire. Fire. If you heat it up enough, it glows. It glows red like it's fire. So that's considered to be lighting a fire on Shabbat. That for sure is prohibited. That's electric lights and heating elements. While it is true that in the past people did not generally produce heat or light by heating metal, we nevertheless find that heating metal for any purposes was prohibited by Torah. It's discussed in the Talmud that heating up a metal rod is considered to be prohibited by the Torah. The Rambam writes that if one heats metal with the intention of tempering it afterwards by plunging it into cold water, he transgresses the Torah prohibition of mav'ir. Clearly, then, heating metal is forbidden by Torah law if it accomplishes some purpose. Right there, the purpose they would do that for, they wouldn't actually use these elements for heating, but they would they would make horseshoes, for example, right? You put a horseshoe in the fire, and then you bend it while it's soft, and then you put it in cold water, and then it retains its shape, right? It's called tempering. So that's what they used, but precedent is clearly defined as mav'ir, lighting fire, even though it's not a regular fire that's, we see the fuel being consumed, it's considered fire. Okay? Extinguishing a light bulb or heating element is only rabbinically prohibited. It is different from the normal act of mechabeh, whose purpose is to create charcoal. We spoke about that yesterday. And so it's not for the purpose of a creative act. Contrast, turning an electric appliance creates nothing, so its prohibition is rabbinic. Now, the next section is a little bit, we haven't got to actually discussion of electricity. But the Torah forbids, the last paragraph now, page 37, the Torah forbids performing prohibited melachot by means of electrical appliances. Thus, activating an electric flour mill on Shabbat constitutes a violation of tochen. You're grinding. Operational electric mixer on Shabbat, with a dough hook to make dough, that violates lash. That's kneading dough, and so forth. All the melachot. Right? Can you turn on a machine which is going to write for you? Can you turn on a printer on Shabbat that's going to print things? No, because it's kotev. You are activating the machine, and the machine does the malacha. So that's prohibited. Although the person is not manually grinding or kneading, since he presses the button or flips the switch to turn the appliance on, all the malachot performed, the appliance are viewed as malachot performed by him. So just as one may not turn on an electrical appliance by pressing a button, so too one may not activate something by remote control. Even though there's no direct contact between the finger pressing a button on the remote control and the appliance, since this is the normal way to turn on such appliance, it's forbidden, just as manual activation is forbidden. So this is when the activity that you're doing, the appliance that you're doing, is violating one of the 39 categories of work. It's grinding or it's kneading. What if you have like a fan? You push the button, but there's no prohibition of making air, pushing air. What's the prohibition of pushing air? You're not planting anything, you're not writing anything, you're not grinding anything. So if the machine is going to do it, and you cause the machine, you turn on the machine, so we say that your action, it's as if you did the actual grinding, even though all you're doing is pushing a button. That's a principle to start with, that a person's actions that cause directly the normal way that action to happen, it's considered as if it's your activity, even though there's a machine helping you. But what if there's no prohibition, like a fan? So here, that's the next section, section 2. Yosef, you want to read now, please? Page 38.
Electricity at Torah prohibition, rabbinic prohibition. One may not activate electrical appliances and devices such as telephones, microphones, alarms, doorbells, fans, air conditioners, and computers on Shabbat. Even if these appliances do not contain an incandescent filament or heating element and do not perform any of the 39 melachot, it is still forbidden to use them on Shabbat. Achronim disagree, however, whether the prohibition is by Torah law or rabbinic. Some maintain that using an electrical appliance violates the Torah prohibition of mav'ir, They maintain that electricity has the same status as fire, since, like fire, it has energy and power that can be harnessed. Rav Kook favors this position, arguing that the key aspect of fire is not its appearance, but rather its power to illuminate, heat, and provide power. Indeed, the sages state that there are different types of fire. Yoma includes some that do not burn and destroy. One example of this is the fire that Moshe saw at the burning bush. Um,
Wow. So this is an extreme position. Most rabbis have never even heard of this position because Rav Kook didn't write it in a book. He wrote it in a responsa. He says here in the footnote, the responsa was only printed in 1979. Now this debate happened, in the 50s or in the 40s when electricity became more common, or even earlier. And so Rav Kook's opinion is a little bit of an outlying one. He actually thinks it's fire. He defines fire differently. He says fire is energy and power that can be harnessed. So even if you don't have anything that looks like fire, it's not red, hot, it's not, he calls that fire. This is a nice chiddush. But this is, most of the Achronim did not go in that direction. If you look in the footnote number 1, at the time the Chazon Ish was inclined to say the use of electricity on line 8 is prohibited by Torah law on account of boneh. But many disagreed with him, including Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And then he brings a few Achronim who actually agreed with Rav Kook. And this is really perhaps the most stringent opinion, Rav Kook's opinion, because that means you're not even allowed to increase even if the circuit has already been completed and you want to increase the voltage, if there's some way to amplify the power of the appliance, that would be prohibited by Torah law if it's mavir, according to Rav Kook. According to the Chazon Ish, it's a Torah law to complete the circuit. It's building a circuit, but after it's already built, you're just increasing the amount of flow of electricity. That would be not prohibited by the Torah. According to Rav Kook, it would. So if you look down in the next, I'm looking at the footnote on page 39. You see that footnote number 1, the second paragraph? It says, many contemporary authorities accept the opinion of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach that there's no Torah portion involved in using electricity. However, lechatchila, they still take into account the opinion that maintains it is prohibited by Torah law. Moshe maintains the status of prohibition is unclear. Everybody knows it's not allowed. Question is it Doraita or Drabanan? Until today, there's a matter of debate. Some poskim treat it as it's Doraita, l'chumra. But when there's a need, maybe for security or for some kind of a medical need, then they say we have who to rely on, who says it's only rabbinical, and there's no boneh, and there's no fire, and it's only a rabbinic prohibition. So he says here that we try to be machmir if we can, but when there's a need, well, there is the other opinions to rely on, that it's only rabbinic. If it's rabbinic and you do it in an indirect way, or with a shinui, or sometimes there's a great need. You're allowed to transgress a rabbinic violation. So let's go back to the text now, and we'll finish it off. But this is the first approach. There was fire in the burning bush, and it didn't consume the bush. What kind of fire is that? It must be, but it's called fire by the Torah. So we see that even fire, which doesn't consume anything, is still called fire. This is a big chiddush. And of course, we love Rav Kook, right? He's our mentor. So we take that. That's why Rav Melamed goes to great pains to present that as the first opinion. Most people, when you speak to them and you say, well, electricity you're not allowed to use because it's fire, they think you're primitive. They think, oh, those stupid rabbis, they don't know how electricity works. They think that this was, at first, people thought electricity, the way the electrons go, they thought it was, wow, this is like fire. And this is not based on a misunderstanding of electricity. It's based on a unique interpretation of what's considered fire. It's a halachic interpretation. But and it's true that when electricity first came out, rabbis didn't know what it was, and there were some misunderstandings. about how it works and how the science works. And maybe people thought it was fire. But when we say that maybe it's fire, we're not doing it based on bad science. We're based on, Rav Kook says it, based on novel interpretation of the Talmud, of the principles of halacha. Anyways, most people disagree even with that. And most people say electricity in no way, if there's no filament, if there's no heating element, if there's no metal rod that heats up, it's not fire. It's for sure not fire. Well, what is it? Okay, some people say it's a prohibition of bonnet. Some people say it's, as I said to you the other day, he doesn't quote here the Minchas Hashem, Rav Osher Weiss. He believes it's makeba patish, which is similar to the Chazon Ish. But let's see the other opinions. We're up to page 38, 8 lines from the bottom of the page, Rabbi Uziel. Okay, Yosef, you want to read? He was the chief rabbi, I believe, after, together with Rav Kook. He was the Sephardic chief rabbi, together with Rav Kook, Rav Uziel. Great scholar. What did he say?
Rabbi Uziel agrees with this approach, adding that turning on electricity is also prohibited as a form of mataken mana, since activating an electrical appliance renders it useful.
Right, metaken mana means fixing a vessel. To make a vessel usable, fixing it is a rabbinic prohibition of fixing a vessel. So he adds that it's both fire and metaken mana. They live together, they studied together, they were both chief rabbis together. So obviously he didn't go against Rav Kook's chiddush, but he added on that even if you disagree with that chiddush, there's still a rabbinic prohibition of creating a vessel. Activating the appliance renders it useful. It's a rabbinic prohibition. Go ahead.
Chazon Ish or Chaim maintains that turning on electrical appliance is prohibited on account of bonnet, because completing a circuit creates a kli. When electricity flows through a device, an electrical wire within comes to life and activates the device. Thus, one who completes a circuit builds an implement, and one who breaks a circuit demolishes it. Many others maintain, however, that using electrical appliances do not contain an incandescent filament and do not perform one of the 39 melachot. It is only prohibited rabbinically, as is considered a weekday activity.
Right, weekday activity, remember that? We said uvdin dechol, a weekday activity. That's a rabbinic prohibition. It's a weekday activity. You're not allowed to do things which are weekday activities. They define it. It's prohibited. Of course, it's a much weaker prohibition. It's a rabbinic prohibition, not biblical. But go ahead.
Additionally, some maintain that turning on appliances is prohibited because it is creating a new entity on Shabbat, molid.
Molid, right? We saw that as well, creating something new. So, also rabbinic.
As it creates a new electrical current in the wires. No Torah prohibition is involved because there is no fire in appliances without an incandescent filament. There is no problem of bonnet because an electrical circuit cannot be considered a kli, that is, an implement or receptacle. This is the opinion of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Rav Eliezer Weinberg.
Right, he was that young rabbi. Eventually, he became an old rabbi, and he became one of the Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. He became one of the greatest poskim of our generation. But his early career, he took on the Chazon Ish. He said it's not bonnet. At most, it's going to be a rabbinic prohibition using electricity. In any case, in practice.
In practice, we defer to the opinion that using electricity is a Torah prohibition. In times of need, when there are additional reasons to be lenient, we rely upon those who believe that using electricity is also a rabbinic prohibition. Okay, so
that's it's good to know. It's good to know. Using electricity, if there's no other solution, it could be considered rabbinic. If you have a need, yeah.
What about Rabbi? Let's say there's a lot of electricity that has like voice recognition and it's automatically like. Let's say someone set up like voice recognition, like, and all of a sudden the heater comes on.
Activation, activation. Voice activation. So if it's the normal way, that it's designed to work that way, then like we said before, it's like pushing a button. If your intention is to turn on the machine, Alexa, dial Hananel, right? Alexa, play music, the Rolling Stones, whatever. That's designed to be activated by your voice. It's like pushing a button. So you're responsible for doing that action. If the action it's going to do is prohibited, then for sure it's prohibited, right? If it's going to grind, Alexa, grind up some coffee for my morning coffee. Alexa, turn on the coffee machine and boil me a cup of coffee. For sure, that's prohibited. But this is even if you don't um, boil something, cook something, or grind something. All you do is activate Alexa herself. Alexa, how are you this morning? That's using electricity, and you're using it with your mouth instead of using it with your hands. But if that's the norm, becomes a normal way to turn on electricity. Bottom line is you're not allowed to turn on electricity from the Torah, from the rabbinic problem. But using electricity in any way, that's a normal way, is prohibited. So we don't use electricity, even voice activated. Okay? Okay, yeah.
I have a question. Not to heat up with the electric appliance with the filter, but there's a particular Shabbat food.
Yes.
It's also heating up with the electric.
We don't turn it on Shabbat. We leave it on from before Shabbat. Before Shabbat, we turn it on, and then it continues to heat throughout the Shabbat based on what we did on Erev Shabbat. But on Shabbat, you cannot turn it on or off.
And then, Rob, what about the filter? There is one hot side and there is a cold water.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh,
So we're going to see all the different appliances. He relates to water coolers and water urns. It's all coming. It's all coming. We're going to discuss many different appliances. First ones he discusses is microphones. For some reason, it's actually a big question about a hearing aid. Someone who puts a microphone and an amplifier in his ear to hear, because you get older, many times your hearing weakens, and it's more and more common. People have they can they put a little machine that uses electricity in their ear to hear. Is that allowed on Shabbat? What do we do? There's so many devices now. He can't cover all the devices, but we'll try to do the best we can. Okay. Why don't you read for us, Idan? Please read number 3 on page 40.
Electrical appliances that produce sound, telephones, and microphones. As we have seen, the prohibition of using electric appliances on Shabbat includes microphones and telephones. Even if a phone is in use before Shabbat, or if a microphone is turned on before Shabbat, one may not speak on the phone or use a microphone on Shabbat, because doing so increases the electric current running through it and violates a Torah or rabbinic prohibition. In addition, the sages banned Hush Ma'at Kol, producing sound, with an object specifically designed for this purpose. Many maintain that one who speaks into a microphone transgresses this prohibition. Furthermore, using a microphone resembles a weekday activity. It also may seem to belittle Shabbat, as those who hear the amplified sound are likely to think that the microphone was activated on Shabbat.
Yeah, this is a mark. It became a mark of the difference between the Orthodox synagogues and the conservative synagogues. Is that the Orthodox, for the most part, based on this ruling, do not use microphones on Shabbat, even though it's a big hall, and the rabbi wants his speech to be understood and heard by everybody. We don't use a microphone, because a microphone has a few problems. It's electricity. When you speak into it, it makes the electricity, current peak, and also it produces sound. Hashma'at kol usually is like making something that's noisy, but an object designed for producing sound is not allowed on Shabbat, and it's a weekday activity. Bottom line, it became pretty much standard that we don't use microphones on Shabbat. There are some rabbis that have a special form of a microphone. We'll see later on that They design it specially, and they put a big sign on it. This was activated from before Shabbat. It's a special type of microphone that's designed with all the rabbis' input, so that it doesn't violate any of the prohibitions. And we're, for the sake of mitzvah, okay, we're not just making a party with loud music. We're using it in shul for the services. There's some newfangled machinery which some people have given permission. Some reliable rabbis have given permissions to, but it's not very uncommon. Very uncommon, and for good reason. It became pretty much a standard that we do not use microphones on Shabbat. Okay, it's another example of using electricity. Now, what about? Go ahead, Idan. Nevertheless,
one who is hard of hearing may use an electric hearing aid that rests on or inside the ear on Shabbat as long as it is turned on before Shabbat and he does not adjust the volume on Shabbat. When he wants to go to sleep, he can remove the device without shutting it off. In the morning, he may put it back in without turning it on. Although we stated that one may not use a microphone or telephone because speaking into it increases the electric current, this prohibition applies only when someone speaks directly into them. However, when speaking normally, the activation of the device in the wearer's ear is secondary and therefore a form of gramat, which is permitted when truly necessary. Furthermore, there is no problem of producing sound on Shabbat or delivering Shabbat since the sound is heard only by the wearer.
okay, so it's a unique application of that. It's not ideal, but it can be allowed for the sake of someone who's hard of hearing. There's no problem of making a sound out loud because it's not out loud. And what about the electricity that's being used? Well, it's different than what you asked, Yosef. You asked, can you activate on purpose? It's designed to be voice activated. Can you activate a machine? So I said, no. It's like pushing the button. What's the difference whether you use your mouth? Here, you're never actually pushing a button on the earpiece to make it work. What makes it work is you want to ask for Stephen, how are you this morning? You're speaking.
Yeah.
You're speaking. Now it just happens to be that the speaking activates the earpiece. That's a secondary, unintended action. Now, we said usually if it's inevitable, we know it's going to happen, it should be prohibited. But in this case, if we're dealing with a rabbinic prohibition, there's room to be lenient, and without getting into the long discussion. Every one of these psakim, by the way, every one of these decisions is based on hundreds of pages of discussion over the last 100 years, where every new device comes up, the rabbis discuss it. There's actually there's a journal of halacha and science, designed specifically for these types of issues. All sorts of new machinery, all sorts of questions that come up because of the technology, and how do we relate to them halachically, whether it's Shabbat, whether it's other prohibitions. So yeah, there's a lot of scholarship, and here is giving you the bottom line for how we keep Shabbat for the layman. Okay? Here he goes on to say, just as one may not turn on a microphone before Shabbat with the intention of using it on Shabbat, so is leaving on an intercom over Shabbat to hear the voices of people coming to visit, or to hear what's going on in the children's room. Some people have a baby intercom. They want to go to sleep in their room, but their room is far away from maybe the baby's going to start crying in the middle of the night and they won't hear him. So they leave on an intercom from, maybe you can turn it on before Shabbat. But what about, that's a microphone. We're using a microphone essentially. He says, to be sure, if one simply speaks normally in the room and not directly into the intercom, the prohibition is less severe, since it is then a case of grama. It's indirectly. It's not like you're intending to speak into the microphone. It is nevertheless prohibited because of a weekday activity. The little Shabbat produces sound. Right? There's a speaker, so the parents can hear what goes on with an object designed for that purpose. So we don't ideally use intercom system, even for children, on Shabbat. However, if the intercom was accidentally left on over Shabbat, as long as one does not intend to use it, he may speak in a normal fashion in the room with the intercom. Again, it's not intended, you're just speaking in general, and but we should not use it. It's too similar to a microphone, a speaker, a telephone, all those things. We're using electricity, probably only rabbinically prohibited, but we don't use electricity, and that's going to be activated on Shabbat. So it's he's Machon Meir here about the intercom, and he's Mekel only in a case where it was left on by accident. This is, I want to add on, if you see in the footnote on page 42, he adds on another phrase. Remember we said, okay, we'll continue the chain. We're slowly learning a little bit more every day. So we have melacha is prohibited work, right? Well, we know that it has to be machshava. Has to be intended work, right? Intention. We said, well, intention. What if there is no intention? No intention. It's the vasha ein mitkaven. No intention. So we said that's allowed. But wait. If it's inevitable, what did we call that? We called it psikaresha. Psikaresha. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. So then it's as if it does have intention. Okay, you see this little loop. It's not intentional. I want to drag my. I want to have my bench. But if it's a heavy bench, it's for sure going to cause a furrow. So then I'm responsible for it, as if it was intentional. But there's another distinction that we're adding now, and that is that even if it's inevitable, then there's two options. There is sikresha de nichale, and lo nichale. What does it mean, nichale? Noach means comfortable, means advantageous. You want it. I'll write that in English. Advantageous. So for sure that an inevitable consequence, unintended, if it's advantageous, so we say, how unintended is it? It's unintended, but it's to your advantage. You're happy about it. So that's more of a problem. But if it's lo nichale, even though it's psikresha, because it's not to your advantage, many times you don't even care. Like what do we say? If you're opening up the fridge door and the light is on, but it's daylight, I can see my food fine without the light. So it's davar she'eino mitkaven, because I really want to get out the food. I don't want to turn on any lights. But it's inevitable that the light's going to turn on, so it's forbidden. But because it's a psikresha de lo nichale, it's not necessarily to your advantage, because you don't. At nighttime, it is to your advantage. You'll be able to see which milk you want to take, 3% or 1%. It's great that there's a little light on there. But in the daytime, you can see without the light. It's not really, it's not to your advantage at all. You're not enjoying it. So then, it already takes it down a level to, some poskim say, if it's a Isser D'Rabbanan, and it's Psik Reisha, the Lo Nichale, then it's allowed. Okay, so there's a lot of maneuvering that you can do here. These are some of the basic concepts, okay? So regarding this, what were we talking about here? He mentions about using the baby monitor.
So
it was left on by accident, and it's not really advantageous to you because you're sleeping really close to the baby's room anyways. It's not, you're not even going to sleep, so for sure you're going to hear it. So the fact that there's noise in the room and it goes into the speaker, you can still talk and speak as normal in the room without having any concern with the inevitable consequences, which are not advantageous. That's what he bases himself on with this indirect or unintentional use of the microphone and the intercom. Yeah, you had a question?
About the fridge. So the light is open. This is during the morning. We consider it the nichale. Now, if we close it.
You're not allowed to open it again. We generally only do psikresha de lo nichale in extreme circumstances. For example, if you have no food to eat whatsoever on Shabbat, and it's daylight, and even if you know that the light is on and it's going to turn on, there's room to be lenient. This common custom is to be machmir on that too. It's not that always psikresha de lo nichale is allowed, even with that. And by the way, many of the lights in the fridge, they do have an incandescent, they do have a filament in there. Nowadays it's more and more LEDs, which is only rabbinic for sure. Not for sure, but it's just a regular electricity question. But in the old days, many of the fridges, they have a light bulb that you got to replace with the filament in, and that's a Torah prohibition. So we're going to be more machmir on that. If it actually it's like causing a fire. So it depends. There's a lot of other considerations. It's not like psikresha and nichale, the low nichale is always allowed. It's only when there's a special extenuating circumstances.
So if you put let's say you open it accidentally, and you know that if I close it, I will not be able to open it again.
We don't close it. We keep it open. We keep it open. We put in a little bottle of Coke, near the doorway or a broom handle to make sure it doesn't close all the way. You close it almost all the way. You want to keep the food cold as much as possible, but you don't close it all the way. If you know that the light is going to turn off, even though extinguishing is probably for sure only a rabbinic prohibition, we don't do rabbinic prohibitions either. And so if we know for sure that it's going to happen, and for sure there it's psikresha de lo nichale, you don't care whether it's on or off when you close the door, still, we're machmir and we don't close the door when you know that for sure the light's going to turn off. Okay?
I have a question.
Yeah.
A question regarding phone, using phone.
Yes.
Okay. During this Simchat Torah, the soldier, because of the terrorist attack,
yes,
they are allowed to use phone.
Correct.
But this rabbi asked him to come and see me to help him to maneuver with the phone. But he's carrying the phone. I mean, he can use the phone, isn't it?
Yes.
But why?
He was trying to be machmir. He's trying to be very stringent. He was using it as a Shabbos goy, right? Because you're not finished the conversion, right? So he was saying, instead of me violating the Shabbat, let the non-Jew do it. It's no violation. But there is a principle that whenever we're going to learn about it in the coming chapters, whenever there's an issue of loss to life, danger to life, you shouldn't waste time. If that was going to delay his response time, maybe he should have not been so careful to take it over to you. But listen, it's good to have sensitivity to Shabbat, and it's so strange for us to be using our phones on Shabbat. And it could be he's in a certain unit where there's no tremendous danger to life that would make a difference, an extra 5 minutes. So he made the decision that if I can, I'll be machmir and I'll let a non-Jew handle my phone on my behalf instead of doing it myself. But I like to say that it's very hard when you use, especially you're talking about a cell phone now. Cell phone, there's no lights that are incandescent light bulbs. Even in the used to be when you used the phones, there was a phone. What's that called? A central place where for every line to be connected, a light bulb would go on, right? And you'd plug in the switches. There would be a switchboard operator, right? And there'd be lights going on for every call. It doesn't happen anymore. There is no switchboards, especially with cell phones. It's all digital. It's all in the computer, and there's very little electricity. Very, very little problems with using the electricity in the phone. Is much less than when you use it even in using electricity connected to the electric circuit. Anyways, he wanted to be machmir, but if there is a danger to life, you don't have to do that. Okay? Yes.
is and Shabbat the lighting day and on, and then the depends to light and make the sun cover. The lighting's okay.
You're right. Yeah, you're allowed to cover it. Yeah, you're allowed to cover it up. You're not turning it on or off, so it's fine to cover it. Yeah. There's a special lights made for Shabbat. Shabbat lamp. You've seen them with a cover. Yeah, they turn them all different kinds. As long as you're not turning the light on or off, that's fine. Yeah.
It's just same like the fan. You can move the fan also.
The fan is a little bit harder. That question of the fan depends on what we just learned. If the problem is completing a circuit,
no, the fan is on.
I know the fan is on.
Yeah.
So then, by moving it, you might increase the current, right? But according to the Chazon Ish, that's no problem. The currents are the circuit's already built. What's increasing more? But you're just like you have a vessel, you can use it 100 times as long as you don't create the vessel. So according to the Chazon Ish, the vessel, you're not by increasing the current, there shouldn't be any problem. According to Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Molid, you're not creating anything new. It was useful. It was being used all along. So there's room to be lenient about increasing or decreasing the current in an electrical appliance which is already on. But according to Rav Kook, that it's considered to be fire. Any electricity is considered to be because there's power, and so that you would not be allowed to. But it's common. For example, a great posek who really guided all of us for many years was Shmirat Shabbat Gilchata, the book by Rav Neubert from 50 years ago. It became the first modern bestseller halacha book. And if we were, if we didn't have Pnei Halacha, that's the book we would be using. We have about 10 copies of it in the English library. It was translated into English in 3 volumes. In Hebrew, it's 1 volume, and they added a second volume. Anyways, it's a classic of modern halachic literature. It was the first book to be published in this format, which is a modern format with an index at the back, and you can, and chapters by topic, like we have here. A whole chapter about electricity. The old books, there was a chapter about plowing and about smoothing, and a chapter about cooking, and then you had to look it up that way. But nowadays you have an index, and so there's a chapter about preparing food, all the different melachot that are involved. It's more of a modern format, and of course with the index in the back. So Shmirat Shabbat Kechata was a groundbreaking book, and there he follows Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, that young rabbi who disagreed with the Chazon. He says it's only rabbinic, and therefore he says clearly you could adjust the fan, move the. Even if the current is going to be increased or decreased, he says it's no problem on Shabbat. That's permitted if there's a need for it, and so on and so forth. So, but there's a lot of details. So let's move on a little bit. Next thing we're going to skip elevators. Elevators is another example of this. When you ride an elevator, you increase the current. Because if it were to go, even if you don't push any, of course you shouldn't push any of the buttons. But let's say they have something called a Shabbat elevator in many buildings, hotels, right? You've seen that there's maybe after 6 elevators in a hotel, 1 of them or 2 of them will be designed as Shabbat elevators. They have a special timer which makes them work regardless of anybody pushing the button. It goes to all the way to the top, and then it stops on every floor. Door opens, you can get out, get in. The door closes automatically without anybody touching any electricity. What's the only problem is that when you get in, your weight makes the motor work harder. Well, if you're very thin and don't have much weight, maybe it doesn't. But if you're a big fat guy, or if you're 10 people walking into the elevator, maybe it's a bigger problem. Anyways, the rabbis deal with this, and some rabbis are more permissive. Some rabbis say, you're just increasing the current, which is going to happen anyways, and you're not intending to increase any current. You just want to be, elevated. So many people allow it. And there is, as I said, there's some people that are machmir on the Shabbat elevators, but clearly you shouldn't push the buttons. We said that in Chutz La'aretz sometimes if you're in a hotel and you don't have a Shabbat elevator, you can have the non-Jew push the button for you, right? Here he says the lenient position is the primary one, while those who are stringent are commendable. By the way, this is one of the ways, this is an unfortunate phenomenon of our society. You might have heard that there's groups of different types of Jews. To our enemies, we're all the same. We're all Jews. No, we divide ourselves. We said, oh, those are secular Jews and those are religious Jews. Wait, that's not enough. That's not bad enough. We divide ourselves into, there are, within the religious Jews, there's Haredi Jews, and then there's the Tilumi Jews. And within the Haredi Jews, there's Hasidic Jews and Misnagdic Jews. And then within Hasidic Jews, there's Breslov Hasidim and Chabad Hasidim. And then within the Breslov Hasidim, there's Nachma people, and then there's the other. There's so many different kinds, so many different divisions. Anyways, apparently, more Haredi rabbis have written against using Shabbat elevators, and more the Tilumi rabbis have been permissible about Shabbat elevators. So you know what they do nowadays? When you want to build a building and you want to design the population. So now if you have a building that's, let's say it's 20 floors, and you want religious people to live there, how can they use it on Shabbat? Who's going to walk 20 floors of stairs with little children in tow? So Haredim usually have lower buildings. Well, what about a Shabbat elevator? Oh, well, many Haredim poskim don't say you shouldn't use a Shabbat elevator. So let's say you want to design that this community should be welcoming to religious Zionists and not the Haredim. So you'll build a taller building and put in a Shabbat elevator, and that increases the price of every apartment building because everybody has to pay for the common elevators. But so the Haredim are not going to want to do that. They're not going to use a Shabbat elevator. They don't want to pay extra for it. And so they won't come live in such a building, whereas religious Zionists will. So there's a way of sort of engineering society based on the halachic customs of the different groups. It's not absolute. There are many Dati-Lumi rabbis who are machmir on the laws of Shabbat elevators, and there are the Haredi rabbis who are mekel. But there is a certain standard, a certain style, which becomes very signature to different groups. So even the real estate people know about these, and if they're designing cities and designing neighborhoods, and they want to design it not for Haredim, so they will put in a Shabbat elevator and build. And if they want it specifically for Haredim, they'll try to get lower apartment buildings, and they won't put in a Shabbat elevator, and all these kind of calculations. But it's fascinating.
Robert, does that mean that you cannot invite your Haredi friend come for your Shabbat?
You can invite him. He can always walk up the stairs if he wants.
Yes.
If he doesn't want to, he'll say no. But of course you should invite him. What? Yeah.
Why you cannot bike?
Bicycles is a good question. Bicycles is a different chapter, unless you're dealing with an electric bike. An electric bike is the problem of electricity, which we don't use. But a regular bike, it's very hard. It's sort of like the discussion we had the other day about umbrellas. So what's wrong with an umbrella? It's already there's a tefach there already, and you're just opening it up, something that was pre-existing. You're not creating a new ohel. It was an ohel already from before Shabbat. Why should it be prohibited? We said the custom is we don't use umbrellas, and there's a little bit of a history to that. Same thing with bicycles. When bicycles started were produced, invented, the rabbis were asked, can we use the bicycle? And many of the rabbis said no. And also then, one of the reasons they said was because the bicycle is going to break down, you're going to fix it.
Yeah.
And I think it's still true today that bicycles do break down and you need to fix it. But I think it was more true at the beginning. The bike almost had to be reassembled each time you used it, right? The pedals came out, and I don't know exactly how it worked. But there was a greater problem with fixing the bicycles, and the rabbi said no. And then you get to the question of what about the atmosphere of Shabbat? It's a weekday type of activity, and pretty much the standard became we don't use bicycles on Shabbat. Although when it comes to the actual laws of Shabbat, it's hard to find why not. You're not riding, you're not plowing, and maybe there's a problem with Eruv. Obviously, if you're going to be if you don't have an Eruv, it could be problematic. And that's similar to the discussion we had about the umbrellas. Bottom line is, the standard is Orthodox Jews don't ride bikes on Shabbat. When there's a specific need, when there is an exceptional situation, it makes a lot of sense to allow it because it's really not, it's very hard to find what's prohibited. You're not making a noise necessarily. Try to think of all the what could be the problem. The biggest problem is fixing it. But if your bike's it doesn't break down every day, it's not so common that you have to fix a bike. Right, but we do see that the rabbis prohibited things, the rabbis of the Talmud prohibited things because you might fix them. Example we spoke about were musical instruments. Right, the rabbi said you use musical instruments in Shabbat because they might break and you might fix it. So we see the way the rabbis of the sages were thinking, and so there's some modern day rabbis who use the same logic to new types of appliances. If there are appliances that are going to break down and you might fix them, we should say it's not allowed. It's not as severe as something written in the Talmud, like playing musical instruments is actually prohibited from the sages of the Talmud. This is modern inventions. It doesn't have the same stringency, but the custom is we don't use a bicycle. There's exceptions. Somebody lives in far away from the shul, and he can never get to shul unless he rides his bike. You might find. I think I spoke once with somebody who said a rabbi gave him a special permission to use his bicycle to get to shul on Shabbos, but it's rare. It's not the standard. Okay, good question.
Thank you.
All right.
I say because of bicycle, you make the fall down, you take it up to carry. So
You might carry it, right? If there's no Eruv, for sure it's a problem. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay, good. Let's move on.
Now,
Yes.
about the elevator, I can tell the non-Jews to press for me.
If you have no other solution, you can, but it's best to hint to them. Don't tell them directly. But if necessary, you can.
The best way is to walk on the stairs. Still.
Yeah, it can be hard if you're on the 20th floor. It's a big challenge. But in most places where there's a lot of Jews, they do put in Shabbat elevators. And definitely somebody who's elderly or has trouble walking, they can rely on the lenient positions. Of course, there's these institutes of Torah and science, halacha and science, who are always coming up with new methods of making the mechanism of the elevator better and better. So it's even more grama, and it's less affected by the weight of the person riding it. There's all sorts of different ways of doing it. But you need basically halachic, rabbinic supervision to create a proper Shabbat elevator. Yeah.
Maybe I was not to hear about the umbrella. How's about the hat?
Yeah, we did discuss it. We discussed it that I don't know if you've seen people like that. Some people wear a black hat.
Yeah. I use it sometimes.
Especially on Shabbat. A fedora. Even a fur hat. If you've seen some Hasidim, my son has a fur hat on Shabbat. He's a Hasid. Shtreimel, it's called. That's right. I tell him it might be prohibited to wear that shtreimel because it's so wide. They keep getting bigger and bigger because we're richer and richer. Society, as a standard of living goes up, so they make it more and more, fancy. it could be a problem. It could be an ohel. It's more than a tefach. But the custom is because you're really wearing that hat, not because it gives you shade. You're giving it. It's just there for your, for the custom, for the honor, for respectful dress. But some rabbis didn't like it. They said they make sure that the brim is less than a tefach. You have to be sure that it's less than a tefach, right? Yeah, a hat that you wear is not a separate tent above you. It's like a piece of clothing. It's a piece of clothing, so you're wearing it. That's allowed. But it's the part that you don't wear, that extra brim outside, where maybe it's a problem of ohel, of creating a tent. But the bottom line is you can wear a hat. Okay? Make a long answer short.
The umbrella again, I use the gadol to
Yes. Again, you're wearing it. It's not a separate structure that you're creating.
Yes, umbrella, something like that.
Yes, you can hold it above you so that you don't get wet. That's fine. That's no problem. Yeah, you can't, make an umbrella. You can take some poles and attach it. But technically, anyways, that's fine. Okay, next. This is a big question, and here too, there are some communities that are machmir, but it could be dangerous. The problem is, we say we don't use electricity on Shabbat, meaning we don't turn on the buttons or we don't flick the switch. But we all use electricity that was turned on from before Shabbat, okay? Because the electrons are already flowing, the circuit's already completed. You're not doing anything on Shabbat. Very nice. You're thinking in the small scale, but fine, you're not completing any circuit on Shabbat. But how come there's electrons flowing through the circuit? It's because somewhere, someone is creating electricity. If it's not a battery, if it's a battery, it's all there. But the electric power plant, there are still coal power plants. There are trucks full of coal that get poured into a big furnace on Shabbat to make sure that there's enough electricity for the entire power grid. So, fine, I'm not going to flick the light switch, but I'm using the lights that are on. How those lights get their electricity? Because somebody, far away, is violating the Shabbat. Somebody's making a fire. Whether you use gas or you use coal, whatever it is, you're creating fires. They're turning turbines. And they're doing it on Shabbat. And many times it gets broken, so somebody has to fix it. As far as you know, the electrons are flowing, but if you're using that electricity, you're benefiting from somebody else's Chilul Shabbat. It's a problem. How do we allow it? Some don't. Some rabbis say, do not use the regular electric power grid on Shabbat. What do they do? How do they keep their lights on? How do they keep their refrigerators on? Their plata for the cholent. How can they have cholent if they don't have electricity? Mm-hmm. What's the answer? Some people have a battery. Some people have a generator, which they don't touch. They fill it up with enough fuel from Erev Shabbat. And nobody works with it. Nobody touches it on Shabbat. You can do that on a small scale. You can have a few friends. If you're in a neighborhood, gets together, everybody pays a few hundred shekels, and they buy a generator, they fill it up on Erev Shabbat, and then they don't touch it. This is what some communities do. The majority of Orthodox Jews rely on the following logic. Yes?
On the Shabbat, there are many people, they lose the electricity, on the 7, on day 7, there are people, they are old person who can't see and go run to the bunker and everything, but can we on the light to see, to help them? Or
Absolutely, yes. When there's a danger to life, you can turn on the lights. turn off the lights. Whatever you need to do to save a life is permitted, 100%. Okay, so what's the logic? Take a look on page 43, section 5. Okay, Stephen, you want to read it for us?
Using electricity that was produced on Shabbat, power supply is a vital need of the state of Israel all week, including Shabbat. Interrupting or impairing the supply can endanger human life. Hospitals are full of devices that depend on the supply of power. And even in private homes, there are people who are dangerously ill who rely on electrical device to stay alive. Police officers and security forces use electrical equipment, and without electricity, they will be unable to respond properly to emergency. On cold day, many homes are heated using electricity. If the electricity were to be withheld on Shabbat, babies and sick people would likely be at risk. Very hot day can also pose a certain risk for those who are ill and require air conditioning. In addition, since nowadays we store food for an extended amount of time in refrigerator and freezer, this food may spoil if the electricity is cut off. In a large population, some would likely contract food poisoning, which can be life-threatening.
Another example is, if there's no electricity, there won't be any street lights. There are people driving around Israel on Shabbat, even if they're non-Jews. There's still people driving and they'll crash and they'll have accidents. People will die in car accidents if you don't have electricity, running the street lights. There's so many uses of electricity everywhere that if we were to have no electricity, it would be very dangerous. Therefore,
it is necessary for the Israel Electric Corporation (IEC), whose employees are predominantly Jewish, to supply electricity non-stop even on Shabbat. If there is some impairment to the supply of electricity in a particular location, whatever is needed to fix it must be done, since technicians may fix the grid on Shabbat. Anyone may benefit from the electricity that is subsequently generated, even though it was restored on Shabbat. The only exception is if a power outrage takes place in a small area where it is known for certain that there is no risk to human life involved, in which case the repair may not be made on Shabbat. If it was nevertheless repaired by Jews on Shabbat, one may not benefit from the electricity until an hour after Shabbat. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach wrote in Shabbat,
Kehilchata.
chapter 32. Much to our dismay, it is known that IEC workers perform activities on Shabbat that are not essential to guaranteeing the electricity supply, but that are for the purpose of saving money. Furthermore, if there were greater awareness of Shabbat observance, it would be possible to automate the entire electricity generating system and eliminate the need for human intervention without extra expenses. It would only be necessary to have a few workers in the power station monitoring the system and troubleshooting emergencies. However, since in fact the IEC does not try to avoid performing Malakah on Shabbat, several leading rabbis rule that one should not use its electricity on Shabbat, but rather use a local generator to avoid benefiting from Shabbat desecration or supporting in any ways. In practice, though this electricity may be used on Shabbat even in Israel, it is true that IEC could take measure before Shabbat to avoid some of the Shabbat violation. Nevertheless, its technicians do what is necessary to guarantee the electricity supply, and they are not desecrating Shabbat, since electricity is necessary for the people to live. Because of this, everyone may benefit from the electricity, since the consumer do not benefit from the malakot performed by the IEC technician for the sole purpose of saving money. And from their perspective, it would be better if the procedure were automated and they may benefit from the electricity on Shabbat. We have recently learned of effort to automate the grid and prevent Shabbat desecration.
I heard a talk from the head of the Israel Electric Corporation, who was a religious Jew. He told me about his efforts. He went on he made a whole business plan how we can use non-Jews workers. There's non-Jewish workers now, but they're not designed. Let's get all the non-Jewish workers to have their shifts on Shabbat. And all the Jewish workers will have their shifts during the weekdays. And that way, the entire power grid will not be a Torah violation. There's no violation, but whatever's unnecessary will not be done by Jews. And some rabbis encouraged him. And in the end, it didn't happen. In the end, it didn't work. Whatever, it's complicated, What if the non-Jew doesn't want to work on Shabbat and the Jews do want to work on Shabbat? We're not there yet. The system is not perfect. Nonetheless, common psak is that we all basically take a tramp. What's a tramp? We hitch a ride on the hospitals and the police force and all those basic needs which we have to have electricity for. So then we can use the electricity for our lighting and for our fridges and platas, and we use the electricity on Shabbat. We don't turn it on and off on Shabbat. We don't complete any circuits, but the current that's being supplied to us is being created for the sake of pikuach nefesh. So we hitch a ride on that. That's the common custom. But there are some people are machmir. My son, for example, wanted very much to do this chumrah where he lives in Tivereh. So he lives very close to the yeshiva. The yeshiva has its own generator. So he paid some extra money for somebody to hook up a long extension cord so that his electricity on Shabbat doesn't come from the regular electric grid, but he uses the generator that they have. The problem is, and this talk I heard from this religious head of the Israel Electric Corporation. It's one of the biggest companies in the country. So a very high up individual, and he's a religious man. He's a yeshiva guy. Anyways, he said it was one of the motivations that he had to improve the system was, he said, is that with these generators, there are some neighborhoods that use the generators. There are always accidents. People are getting electrocuted. The kids come, they play with it. The people don't know what they're doing with the electricity, with the gas. It's a dangerous business to try to generate electricity for a whole neighborhood. And what happens so there's a leak somewhere, or a fuse flips, and then somebody doesn't know what they're doing. They're not professionals in electricity. They try to fix it, and unfortunately, there's been many accidents. So that could actually be another pikuach nefesh, another danger to life by actually running these generators. Obviously, you have to do every effort to do it safely. Okay, timers. Timers we use, bottom line is, we're not turning the lights on Shabbat. We set it from before Shabbat. It can go on and off automatically. That's pretty much common. Rav Moshe Feinstein didn't like it. He thought it was not in the spirit of Shabbat. But he was pretty much overruled by the needs, and other poskim say it's allowed. As long as you're not turning the switch on Shabbat, if it's pre-programmed, it's allowed, and therefore it's considered, grama, whatever. We're not going to get into all the details. There is a debate here. What about if you want to change the timer on Shabbat? On Shabbat, you thought that, okay, Shabbat comes in now, what, at 6 o'clock? What time does it come in? 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock. Okay, so 5 o'clock you go to shul, you come back, you have your meal, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. By 10 o'clock, you should be done with your meal and you're ready to go to sleep. So all night long, I don't need all my lights on in my house. So you put on a timer that the lights will go off at 10 o'clock. What happens is at 9 o'clock, you're having your dessert and you're saying your Divrei Torah, and a bunch of guests walk in. Oh, you're old friends from so many years ago, and you want to stay up all night long drinking beer and telling reminiscences of the good old times and saying Divrei Torah, you're happy. But the lights are going to go off at 10. You want to make it now. The lights should go off at 11 or 12 or 1. Can't turn on the lights. But maybe you can extend the timers. There's different timers, different types of timers. There used to be a type of a timer where you actually had to unscrew. Shmirat Shabbat talks about these types of timers. I grew up with them. There was like a screw that you put in. It was like manual. They're manual, these timers. But there's like levers for each 15 minutes. Or there was a screw that you place it at the time. This is like a dial where there's a certain time, and if as it turns, as the clock turns, and then if it hits a lever, which is like for 10 o'clock, then it'll go off. So can you undo the screw, move it from the 10 o'clock to the 11 or 12 o'clock, and then screw it in over there on Shabbat? This was a discussion. Nowadays we don't have those timers anymore. So we have a different type of timers where there's like a peg. A peg, each 15 minutes or so, there's a peg, and if it's in the on position, the electricity will flow, and if it's in off position, electricity will stop. And you can, every 15 minutes, basically turn the electricity on and off automatically. Can you adjust it on Shabbat? So here, there is options to adjust it. There is there's some fine distinctions. Extending the current state, for example, the lights are on and you want them to stay on or a little longer, some poskim allow that. But the bottom line is some rabbis, like Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu says, don't play with the timer on Shabbat. It might be muktzah, because it's not designed for use on Shabbat. It's connected to the electricity, to the circuit, and it's quite complicated. People get confused. Delaying it, what about if I wanted to turn off and then on again? I want it to go on earlier. People get confused. He suggests don't adjust the timer whatsoever. Shmirat Shabbat allows it. He says there are conditions. In a normal condition, if it's just for a basic need, like you want to sit around with your friends for an hour, what if you want there's a plata that's going to make the food heat up. That's a greater need. Maybe there's even more leniencies you can have. A lot of details here. You can see it inside. I don't think we should cover it. I don't want to take the time. Okay?
There's one.
Yeah.
There's one time my wife invited a friend to come over on Shabbat. She is in the process of a conversion also. She went back. She told her rabbi. Rabbi told us because we are using timer. Say we're not supposed to use timer. So what shall we do?
Who said you're not supposed to use a timer? I didn't say that.
This person went back. She told her rabbi, and her rabbi called us and said we shouldn't use the timer on Shabbat.
At all?
Yeah, I don't understand this. Maybe.
I told you, Moshe Feinstein didn't like it, but this common practice is every home. This is part of the standard preparation for Shabbat, is to set the timer. So the lights to go on, lights to go off. As long as you set it from before Shabbat, it's common usage. But maybe this rabbi was machmir. But it's very common to use a timer. That's what he says. You're allowed to use it as long as you don't adjust it on Shabbat. I can understand that. You don't want to play with it. It could be, if you make the lights go on earlier, then you're like causing the lights to go on. And the question is, how direct is that the normal way? So you might be violating the Shabbat by causing it to go on, But if you don't adjust it on Shabbat, this is a common practice. How much? How much is it worth it to you? You'll pay a high price? All right. Seder. Shukah. Okay, thermostats also. There's thermostats. You shouldn't adjust them on Shabbat. It's a similar discussion. We can skip that as well. The issue of thermostats that we will discuss is page 48, section 8. Okay, everybody turn to page 48, section 8. Opening a refrigerator or oven and entering an air-conditioned room. I already mentioned to you that sometimes there's a thermostat that's going to get affected by your behavior. Like we said, right? An oven works that it's going to turn on if cold air comes in because it's got to keep the heat. So when you open your oven door, let me tell you a story. It should be for the healing of my uncle. He's elderly now, but I don't know if he's watching us, but he should feel better. In any case, every second week I would spend Shabbat in his home for about a year or two. Why did I go to his house every second week? Because, I wanted to get out of my house. But no, also I had a job. I worked on Shabbat. What? How can you work on Shabbat? What was my job? The job was to read from the Torah. There was a community who needed a Torah reader, and the custom is that you can even accept money if you accept money for the practicing, not for the actual performance. And for the sake of a mitzvah, we allow this type of arrangement. In any case, this shul that needed the Torah reader, I split it with a friend. He did 1 week, I did the other week. I could go every other week. And I spent Shabbat in his home. And he had this, my uncle, he liked to stay up later on Friday nights, learning, reading, whatever. And I liked to have a snack. What was his favorite snack? His favorite snack was apple crumble. Yeah, you know what apple crumble is? Sort of like apples with some sugar and some flour, and you put it in the oven, and it stays warm. And warm apple crumble with a cup of tea, it's Gan Eden, right? It's only one problem. You kept it in the oven, and the oven has a thermostat. It sometimes turns it on automatically because it sees that the oven's cooling down too much, so the heating element turns on. And sometimes, when it's hot enough, the oven turns off. That's the way thermostats work. The oven doesn't have to always work. Sometimes it turns off, and when it's off, then, so the problem is, how can you open the door to get the crumble out on Friday night? It's Shabbat now. If you open the door, what's going to happen? Cold air is going to come in, and it's going to change the temperature, and the thermostat's going to turn on the oven. You don't want to cause that. So my uncle had this habit. He would take his chair and his book and sit in the kitchen next to the oven and look. Because the thermostat naturally goes on and off, on and off, on and off to adjust the temperature. So what did he wait for? So that he could get out his apple crumble. What did he look for?
When it's already heating.
Exactly, when the oven's already on, because it got too cold. So then, when you open the door, it's not going to turn on the heating element. It's already on. And so he waited until whenever the heating element turned on, there was a light in the oven also, so you could know when the heating element was on. So he waited until the light went on, the heating element went on, and then he could open up the door and take out his apple crumble. There's a very cute ramification. As I mentioned, there are some you can buy in Israel. There's some ovens that have a Shabbat switch. What that does is that it detaches the thermostat. It has some kind of other cycle where it automatically turns on for 5 minutes and turns off for 5 minutes, regardless of the sensor. And so those, you can open up the oven whenever you want to eat your snack, whenever you want to eat your food. But his oven didn't have that Shabbat switch, and so he would wait until the oven would turn on, and then he'd be able to open the door and get it out. So this is the discussion we're going to do now. It's the same thing about an air conditioning. There's a thermostat, right? We fight about, should it be 24 or 25? It's too cold, it's too hot. But whatever you set it at, it keeps it at that temperature. So let's say it's a hot day out, and you open up all the windows and all the doors. It's going to turn on. And so how can you even walk in the door on a hot day? You're going to let in all this hot air. The air conditioner is going to turn on. It's a thermostat. Same thing with a refrigerator. Refrigerator has a thermostat. It keeps it at the right temperature. Every time you open the door, hot air comes in. The engine's going to turn on. How can we use all these appliances with their thermostat? Your actions on Shabbat are going to affect the machinery. And it's psik reisha. Is it not inevitable? If you had put in hot air, then the air conditioner is going to go on. The refrigerator is going to go on. And the opposite with an oven. If you allow in cold air, we know for sure that thermostat's going to notice and it's going to turn on. So it's psik reisha. So let's see what he says. If opening the door, page 48, section 8. Okay? Yosef, why don't you read again, please?
Opening a refrigerator or oven and entering an air conditioner. If opening the door of a refrigerator causes an electrical event to occur, one may not open the door on Shabbat. Most refrigerators have an electric light inside that goes on automatically when the refrigerator door is open. Thus, if the light has not been removed before Shabbat, one may not open the refrigerator on Shabbat. There are also refrigerators where a fan turns on or off whenever the door is open. These refrigerators and any with similar electrical mechanism may not be open on Shabbat.
The modern refrigerators, by the way, have even more than a light and a fan. They have sensors for humidity, and there's a lot of things that happen inside the electrical circuitry of a modern day fridge, and they're becoming more and more problematic. And the rabbis get very busy trying to make sure that there are special models made where the Shabbat mode doesn't only turn off the light and doesn't only turn off the fan, but makes sure that none of those other circuitries and those other sensors are affected by you opening the door. So it's getting harder and harder. These fridges are much more technologically advanced, but it can be done. But you have to make sure. Go ahead.
In contrast, if it has been ensured that opening the refrigerator will not turn on anything on or off, one may open the door on Shabbat. Indeed, some permit opening a refrigerator when the compressor has cycled on, but prohibit opening the refrigerator when the compressor is off, as opening the door causes warm air to enter the refrigerator. Since the compressor is activated by an internal thermostat, opening the refrigerator may cause the compressor to go on immediately, or at least sooner than it would have been otherwise.
I mean, there's some families where they have this refrigerator and they listen. They don't open the refrigerator until they hear the compressor turns on. Just like what I was saying with the oven. And then, so they limit their use of the refrigerators because you could hear it cycle through. Sometimes it turns off, compressor makes noise, and sometimes it turns on. But, however, in practice,
one may open the refrigerator even when the compressor is off. There are numbers of reasons for this. First, it is unintentional. The person opening the door does not intend to turn on the compressor. Second, it is uncertain whether opening the door will cause the compressor to turn on, as it is possible that the compressor was about to cycle on anyway. Third, even if opening the door does cause the compressor to cycle on, this was only done indirectly, via grammar, as opening the door does not itself turn on the compressor. It simply causes warm air to enter, which may in turn affect the compressor. Accordingly, one does not need to worry about the case where there is uncertainty regarding grammar combined with lack of intent.
because it's uncertainty, so it's not psik reisha. It's not inevitable, right? And you don't really, it's not nichale. It's low nichale. It's you don't actually want the compressor to turn on right now. So there's that's the common practice, is that you can use a refrigerator without worrying about that the compressor is going to turn on because you let in the hot air. But there still is a big problem with the lights and the sensors, and so you have to get a special refrigerator that is kosher. Okay, even in outside of Israel, the refrigerator manufacturers know about this issue. And I read an article not long ago about a team of engineers that worked on the GE, General Electric, refrigeration manufacturing plant in America for like a year. They worked on it, engineers with rabbis, and trying to make sure that they could get a kosher certification for their Shabbat switch, for their refrigerators. As I said, it's making it more and more complicated, but the manufacturers want the business, so they do it. And we have to make sure that when we buy a fridge, if it's a new kind of fridge, you better make sure that there's no sensors that turning on you're not interested in. Okay? Go ahead.
For the same reason, one may drink cold water from a water cooler without checking whether or not the compressor has cycled on. One may also enter a room that has working air conditioner that is controlled by a thermostat, even though opening the door may cause the air conditioner to cycle on. First, if it is not certain that opening the door will cause the air conditioner to cycle on, even if this is not cycle on, this was accomplished by a drum. Similarly, one may open a door or window in a room that has a thermostat regulated heater or air conditioner. This is because the person opening the door or window does not intend to affect the machine. It is not certain that opening the door or window will in fact do so. And if the machine is affected, it will have been accomplished through grammar. However, many are stringent regarding an oven that is controlled by a thermostat and will not open such an oven when the heating element has cycled off. Since it is a small appliance, opening the door is more likely to cause